welcome back to Laurence McKenna channel. It's good to have you guys. I wanted to kind of start the video by saying something along the lines of, Liverpool have sort of hit good form at the right time, but I don't even know if it's really good form. They're just doing better things towards the end of the season, but it isn't necessarily the right time, actually. And so there's going to be an element of, what does this actually mean? Liverpool finishing the season? I looked up their previous couple of seasons. The seasons where we sort of lagged behind other teams, even those points totals kind of feel a little bit out of reach of this side now. They're on 50 points or there and thereabouts after 31 games, 7 games left. And well, if they want to reach the 69 that they got in the season where they did some special stuff to get back into the top 4, or the 75 they also had that season where they were a little bit off the pace, well, they're not even going to reach the 75 because that's not within reach. And the 69, they'd have to win pretty much all the games that are left in order to get to that 71 point, 69 point mark. So it's kind of a weird one, I guess, for Jurgen Klopp and these guys, because to an extent, they have found out that there is a shape that is beginning to work for this team. And I'll talk about whether it works or not in a second. But at the same time, you kind of want to keep your powder dry. You want to keep your fans engaged. You want to be pleasing them because those are obviously, your main customers or the main shareholders of the team, if you like, the guys who are making it what it is. And on the other side, you don't want to kind of give away too much of the game. You don't want to be a workable, outable side, even though, to be honest, most managers are going to be able to work you out no matter what you play, which I guess is kind of interesting in the first place. Like, you've got to work some things out during the game. Sometimes things are a bit of a surprise. But do you really want to use those kind of things? Like maybe Liverpool are going to try a few different ideas in a few different games and see what works. Different combinations of players, different combinations of shapes. Thiago with, say, a Trent at the base of that midfield, or maybe Fabinho at the base of that midfield with Trent obviously starting as a right back and drifting into the midfield. That has been the main chat this week. And one thing I think we need to start the video off with is Trent is a world-class player. Not only in terms of assists and attacks, but there are also games where you see his reading of the game, the way that he sprays the ball out and about on the field is world-class. His delivery is amazing. And that was really what got Liverpool away in this one. The amount of good deliveries from Andy Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold, which really differentiated these two sides. When Liverpool aren't able to break a team down, even though they've got 81, 83, 82% of the possession during the game, they need to be able to look somewhere else. And frankly, I actually think their set pieces have been pretty poor this season. We were used to seeing either a Matip or a Virgil van Dijk wheel away, or even a Lovren back in the day, or even someone like a Saka, someone like that. I was at that game for that Borussia Dortmund thing, but you kind of get my point. Like, there is something in there where you're like, okay, we need multiple different ways to break down a low block. And I'm not even sure that what Nottingham were doing today was always low block. Towards the end of the game, they brought the players on, but you're sort of getting my point here. Like, they were playing a tactic that was hard to break down. So you need players that are good in, I want to say in set pieces, but really Nottingham Forest set piece defending was awful. Like, the space, there was time, they gave players way too much room to be able to do whatever they want to do, which is why Jota scored that lovely finish and goal, but still a surprising goal, kind of dribbled in though. Wasn't really a powerful shot, just unsighted the goalkeeper. So multiple different ways in there where it's like, Salah, nice goal, but I'm not crazy about him scoring those for the rest of the season, or, if he can snatch like that every now and again, great, but it's not like it's like top quality, should we say, even though Liverpool's control of the game was top quality. And that's what I'm kind of saying here is, like, between now and the end of the season, I don't think we're going to see a finished iteration of this Liverpool team. I think we're going to see some levelling up in certain parts of the pitch. So I think we're going to see the team, play well at times. And I think there's going to be positives to take. But broadly, I don't think we're going to see a complete article, partially because we know there are certain players that are leaving, which was covered, by the way, by Fabinho and Alisson earlier this week. Both of them said, I wish Firmino would stay, which kind of worries me a little bit. Like, not worries, but like, there is an element of concern around this, right? There are probably friendship groups within this Liverpool team. There are, shared interests, just ideas and people that players vibe with, which keep a good dynamic within the squad. And clearly there hasn't been that dynamic this season, even though there will still be friendships. I'm not saying no one's a friend, but within that, these cliques or these groups keep teams together. Brazilian people probably more gravitational towards other Brazilians. English players speak the same language, probably, when they go away to the England camp, all those kind of things. And I know people are going to cross over, so there's like maybe a South American group and a European group and all those kind of things, and those will mix. And also probably religion mixes and, just people gravitating towards their background. But you get my point, like, the makeup of a team is really important. I think Jurgen Klopp is really cognizant of that. He knows that this side was really well bonded at one point, and that some of those maybe not the bonds out on the field, but like the way that they were bonded together very often led to better understandings. And some of that understanding is gone this season because people have been unhappy about the dynamics behind the scenes. Now, it's not necessarily a criticism. Players and managers are going to go through rough patches and they're going to try and work things out. And Klopp himself took responsibility for a lot of the play that happened. But you get my point. Like, when you're moving a Firmino on, shall we say, and maybe he's going to a Barcelona or a Galatasaray or something like that, then there is not only is it the end of the era of us, it's the end of the era of those players. Players mourn the loss of a friend. You know, if you have a friend at work that you move on, you kind of go, well, what am I doing now then? Who do I hang out with? Where do I, how do I train? Who do I hang out with out of work? Who do I go for a drink with after all those kind of things? It's similar for football players, These guys are under immense amounts of pressure and that must really bond you as a group. So bringing in new players, especially if they're younger than the more senior players, finding a way to bond all these guys together is a real challenge. But you can kind of see some of those bonds coming together. You can see, Salah taking certain players like Harvey Elliott under his wing, Jordan Henderson always looking for good combinations with Trent. There are those pre-existing relationships, but what's interesting is seeing this side move forward. What's interesting is seeing Liverpool try new shapes, which they felt so almost resistant to doing earlier on this season because, well, the previous shape had worked so well. And it's not saying, well, like if it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, it's not about breaking a system. It's not about that. It's about Liverpool would have been broken if they and to an extent were broken because they couldn't change the system and adapt to where football was going, to teams that have read them, to all those kind of things. So it's about being a more adaptable side. It's about being a more open team for a little while to try and rebuild and fit those blocks back together. It's like putting a Lego piece back together. If you take all your Lego apart, in order to put a new piece together, you have to take it apart. You can't you can reshape to an extent. You have to reshape things. That is kind of what it's like as a footballer, right? Like, say you have a small Lego car here and you're Jurgen Klopp. Well, you can be whoever you want to be, but the analogy is you're Jurgen Klopp with a team, right? So you're with a Lego car. But you want to move the wheels back. In order to do that, you have to take all of the bonnet off. So the bonnet goes back up a little bit, and then the wheels go back a little bit, and the bonnet goes back down. But then you have to shift everything else back, and that impacts the rest of the car, the weight, all those kind of things. It's the same in a football team. When you move a Trent to a different position, it moves the whole back line over, and Konate becomes a lot more aggressive in that back line, leaving a lot more shape. Therefore, people go, well, Virgil van Dijk's not as good as Vidic. Well, did Vidic ever have to deal with that kind of pressure? Or was he always in a very solid back two alongside Patrice Evra or whoever was playing right back for Manchester United at that time? I don't really remember at that point. Did they ever have a meaningful right back at that point? Let me know in the comments below. But the point is with that, there are always going to be adjustments. And to an extent, if you're Liverpool, you might want to play your final form for minutes of the game, but also you kind of want to wait until you play some of these big games, like an Arsenal or something like that, where you go, hey, we've been working on this in training. Let's try this today. Then it works. You see them kind of do this against Man City in most games where Community Shield this season, they've been playing something. It sort of surprised Pep, or it put them on the back foot. It didn't surprise him. He's clearly an intelligent manager, but puts them on the back foot. How do they deal with that? They have to deal with that in the game. When they play Man City, sometimes they take these big risks and sometimes you sort of get knocked back. If you get knocked back, sometimes it's hard to see. Like, Jurgen Klopp can maybe go into a press conference and say, hey, we were trying something new and it didn't work. Actually, I kind of love to hear that sometimes like that. I think as a Liverpool fan, that would kind of be way more refreshing than kind of hearing some of the other stuff we hear. But you get my point. To an extent, it's also, there are loads of people saying, well, Trent should just move into midfield. It's like, well, that's not the midfield that Jurgen Klopp wants to play. He likes having a Fabinho in there. And maybe to an extent, Thiago is a destroyer, but not in the same way as Fabinho is. He kind of breaks up play in a different way and turns it around and is able to distribute it in a different way. Liverpool tend to play Thiago when they're a bit more in control. Fabinho when they want a bit more control. So you sort of get my point there. And also, you could tell later on when Liverpool bought Fabinho off and Thiago was on, and they sold Henderson and Thiago, then they bought 4 players on as a big, 3, maybe 4, as from Nottingham Forest, as to how can we pressure that back line, because now they don't have the destroyer of Fabinho, they don't have an instant out. They've just got Thiago sitting in front, and maybe he's good at turning, but he can, maybe we can press him a little bit and he'll work his way into trouble. To an extent, that worked with Trent. Trent was trying to pass the ball very simply at one point, and Nottingham Forest player just cut it off. So there are all these kind of shapes that I think Liverpool are trying to work out. Like, there are phases to the game now, and because of the 5 substitutions, it's changing things in general in the Premier League, because you can basically play a whole new half of a team, but sometimes that can be awkward for a team to adjust, especially if the other team is also adjusting. If you adjust first, then another manager adjusts and sort of out-adjusts you, you then have to readjust out on the field. So you need players who are smart tactically, like a Thiago, like a Henderson, these kind of people who can read the game and go, we need to do X in order to do this, right? By the way, there's also so many transitional players in this team. Like, look at Cody Gakpo, Darwin Nunez. Apparently he's going into the red in terms of fitness, so there's like a lot of questions over whether we play him more regularly or less, or whether we want to keep, again, our powder dry with him. Cody Gakpo kind of really becoming a much more key player for Liverpool, but clearly when teams sit deep, we need another solution. That's where Firmino was so good so often. We don't seem to have, that's what worries me a little bit, and I've flagged this in previous videos. Do we have a Firmino type who can kind of do something a little bit cute, a little bit neat, and it'd be like his thing without people getting on his back? That's what I'm interested in here. Like, is that Gakpo in the long term? Is that Nunez in the long term? Can he try things? And what pressure are we putting on them to do this? Does this pressure come now, or does it come after the off-season when we see what the new iteration of Liverpool is and new people are coming in? Because there's a lot of contracts ending at Liverpool right now and a lot of new guys sort of seeding and coming through. But yeah, I look forward to knowing you guys' thoughts about that. So there are these adaptable systems that Liverpool are always playing, and they exist as one, as an 11, but they also exist in lots of little moving shapes. You've got the triangle on one side with Mo Salah, Henderson, Trent. Kind of, maybe you include like a Konate in there. The other side, obviously, Virgil van Dijk, Andy Robertson. Sometimes Robertson's really far down the pitch, and then like a Jota today that worked really well. And then in the middle, sorry, I'm just going to readjust. In the middle, you basically got that Fabinho pushes up to really pressure, and then that kind of pushes Hendo out a little bit, or maybe whoever's on the left side of that midfield, whoever you want to name, like it could be a Milner, but it could also be a Thiago, something like that, also pushes up. And then the striker Gakpo drops a little bit deeper, and you've got the two coming in. So you kind of get my point here. Like, there's lots of little ecosystems within the team working together, and I don't think any of them have really worked all that well this season. But in time, I think maybe similar to the previous seasons where Liverpool have stuttered and struggled, there is not an element of, hey, that made us stronger. It's about trialing things. It's about a little bit of, oh, what do we do here if this happens here? And like learning that new relationship. It would be lovely if we could obviously transition completely seamlessly into a brand new system and the players loved it instantly. Sometimes that just doesn't happen. Man City have kind of had that this season. Like, they stuttered and struggled, and a lot of players came back from the World Cup, and Pep Guardiola just put his foot down. Cancelo went out. Foden wasn't in the team for ages. There were loads of players who were frustrated after coming back from the World Cup that they weren't playing, that they weren't being allowed in. And Pep said the level dropped post-World Cup. So it's not like Liverpool are the only team to have this happen. It's just, how do you deal with that, especially if you're not in the same stage of your rebuild as maybe a Man City or other teams like that? I'm asking a lot of questions here, but a lot of them are rhetorical. You sort of get where I'm going with it. So it's lovely to see Jota scoring goals, but again, they don't feel meaningless. It's obviously good for his confidence, but we're looking, at this point, are we just looking for holistic positives within a season rather than overall macro positives if that gets us to the Champions League? Broadly, Liverpool are like kind of in the mix here, because there are still quite a few awkward games for teams like Newcastle, Spurs, even Man United in there. And I'm not saying United are catchable, but if you're within 2 wins in these final 7 games and there can be pressure on these sides, why aren't you in the Champions League mix? You know that Liverpool have been behind before. They're probably the third of the favourites there. They're even behind Aston Villa, I think, in the table at this point. But you get my point. Do you think Liverpool can still get top 4? Is it possible? I'm just asking. Do we even want it to be possible? And should we be pushing for it if we can then go down to 5th? I'm just saying. It's good to chat to you guys. I'll chat to you in a little while. Much love.